Never did I think that I would be an addict myself. I just thought that I was using as a recreational time, spending time with the homeboys or folks. But gradually it started to progress. And then I lost full control of it.
This might sound crazy, but I believe suffering leads to salvation. You have to go through enough suffering before you can surrender and say, God, help me.
So we at Homeboy we brilliantly have removed the stigma just because of our approach and the way we see people as the person rather than the addiction in itself.
The goal is to be able to live a life without any substances. And so if you're going from one drug to another, you're just replacing your addiction with the same behaviors.
Well, thank you for being with me today, Fabian, Inez, and Jose. In this episode, I want to talk about what I call demystifying AA and NA. And I say demystifying because when I first showed up at Homeboy 13 years ago, and as I sat in council and listened to how, as a team, we problem solve and help a person individually, at least half the time it was about a person who was abusing substances, alcohol or drugs. And I really learned so much listening to you all talk about how to help that person along the way. And for someone like me who doesn't have that much experience with, and really a lot of my questions are going to be from the perspective of the rest of the audience who has not had a loved one involved or been through it themselves. So it's almost like elemental questions I'm asking. But I've noticed that you all have like terrific sort of practical wisdom and say in a very straightforward way. So I'm kind of excited to be asking you all these questions. So Jose, I want to ask you the first question. You in your role as Vice President of Operations, you sit at the desk, you welcome new people into Homeboy. They're coming to ask if they can be part of our program. And you see their struggles of what they've been through. And you see the folks who are been abusing substances. How's that changed over the years? Are more people struggling? Is it over half the people have abused substances in their past? How would you characterize the current situation?
Yeah, I would say definitely probably more people abusing substances. I think we have more of an access to controlled substances than we ever have. I think Big Pharma has contributed to that. I think we're in a day where we try to really prescribe our way out of problems. And with human beings, it's a tricky thing when you try to do that. While I'm at the desk, I see homies coming in, people coming in and definitely struggling with substance abuse issues. But, here at Homeboy, we don't look past those issues, but we really start to look at how can we first stabilize them before we go right into like the substance abuse issue. Like, let me focus on the housing situation first. Do you have a support system? Who are the people in their lives that they're talking to? Do they have any, self-awareness? Are they connected to any groups, AA, NA? Have they ever been in treatment before? And so we start with that. And, a lot of that I learned from Fabian early on is really like we call it spoon feeding recovery here. We give you just doses of it. But we also do it in a way where like we're helping to bring relief to other areas of your life, not just the substance abuse issue. But to answer your question, yes, I do believe we're in a time where I see an increase in substance abuse usage for sure.
Yeah. And so I'm glad you mentioned Fabian, because Fabian, when I first started, you were leading the Department of Substance Abuse Therapy and all. And I learned a lot just listening to how you approach people. Kind of what's your fundamental approach to someone who's using substances?
I mean, I think once you are able to step back and recognize that using substances is a disease, then you'll be a little bit more compassionate about understanding, the root cause of why we cope in this type of way. Because in the end of the day, it begins as a coping mechanism that then begins to progress, and then we become addicted too. Then we realize that we may just have a chemical imbalance, and now we have been feeding that, right? So it's important to recognize and understand the whole person, so that we can really get to the core issue of what has put them in this such substance abuse path. And I say that, from my own personal experience, because never did I think that I would be an addict myself. I just thought that I was using as a recreational spending time with the homeboys or folks. But gradually it started to progress. And then I lost full control of it. And I couldn't pinpoint why. But it wasn't until I got into recovery that I turned to understand that, it all stems from my trauma. And that was one form of coping through it rather than doing it in a healthier way. But then I became addicted. So then it led to a progression, which was also putting me in this path of not being comfortable with myself and also bringing those others along, hurting others, right, that love you the most. And so in the end of the day, it's about that. It's about understanding the root cause and looking at the person as the whole person and trying to understand the story so that we can revisit where it all went wrong or where it all began, else we can mend those wounds.
Sure. So, and as you currently lead that team, someone's sitting in front of you, they're trying to get into Homeboy, and the team has alerted you, they think this person has a substance problem. What do? You don't go right into trying to look at the whole person or explain their life to that fella in this case. How do you approach it?
I think I learned from Fabian a long time ago, I do ask questions. I do want to get to know the person a little bit. I don't like when they just come across the desk and, this person's using, so let's send them to rehab right away. I want to hear from that person, what's their name? What are they carrying? Do they have kids? Where are they staying? Kind of to start putting pieces of the puzzle together so that, we can put the help that they need together for them. A lot of times they come in and they don't even realize they have a problem. They'll tell me, I don't have a problem with using. And one of the questions I always ask them is well, let's ask your partner or let's ask your mom, let's see how they feel about this, I try to paint a picture of what their life looks like and how would it look if the substances were not there.
So we also drug test our folks before they come in. So are you having this conversation before they drug test or after they drug test?
Both, sometimes, we've got to a place where we kind of know when they're coming through the door. There's a magic that happens during the drug testing part of it. That's where we can use the conversation part, When's the last time you used? Or have you been clean? How long have you been clean? Are you coming from rehab? During that time, when we're drug testing is when the person's most vulnerable, where they might be more willing to tell the truth. And so that time of the part of the drug testing is where we get a lot of information from the person because we're going to see them through the whole 18-month program. We're going to see them when they come back. And so at those moments when they're most vulnerable is when we get the most information from them. So
a lot of what I've learned from you all is that abusing substances is in some ways, I think, Fabian, you've been kind of mentioned this, self-medicating. There's trauma in your life, there's wounds in your life, and you're trying to escape that. So Inez, when you're early on talking to somebody and they're admitting to their abuse, do you try to sort of help fix the wounds, or as Jose says, you have to stabilize somebody before you get there?
We got to stabilize them first, There's like this, it's like a magic thing it's a magic way to paint the picture for them. And I learned that from Fabian, right? Sometimes we have to get creative in how we approach what help looks like. Because if you tell somebody, it's going to be rehab, homie, they're going to tell you no right off the bat, right? Because it's like, I just got out of prison. I'm not trying to go back to another prison. They have this idea of what rehabs or help looks like, And so we try to paint it in a picture of where it's not so frightening for them,
And also, you want to hopefully invite the person who is struggling with the addiction to make the choice. And creatively, you are painting these pictures almost like selling recovery in such a way that it's going to be so intriguing and promising that they make the choice. Because when you try to push someone and force someone into recovery or rehab, immediately you can lose the battle there. But if you creatively package it and sell it in the most beautiful, articulate way, then they make the decision so that when they excel in their recovery, guess who did it? I did that. You see? And that's the tricky part. But it comes with building relationship, continuum of engagement, and, lack of judgment, and just embracing them as they are for who they are in the moment, and not seen as a drug addict.
Yeah, that's really important, I think. How they feel, like the trust whether it be stabilizing them or offering a resource, there's got to be some building done before you can really pitch the rehab or, whatever the resource is going to be. Because you got to think, when you're, addicted to a substance, you're already dealing with shame and guilt. You already think everybody looks at you a certain way. You're dealing with that already internally. You're actually your worst critic. You've actually already identified that your life is not where you want it to be. If you have children, you already feel down at yourself for not being a good dad. You're already beating yourself up, which actually fuels the drug addiction. You're in this vicious cycle of shame and guilt, shame and guilt, shame and guilt. And then you encounter somebody that you develop trust with. You start to be able to be transparent with. You start to get honest with. You look at them. And when you think about like AA, NA, that is like one of the core values of the program, is you allow people to fall apart right in front of you and you don't judge them. That was actually how the first two dudes ever got sober, was because they did away with shame and guilt. It was one alcoholic helping another alcoholic, to the point of they even laughed at some of the behavior because they understood it, from a real, true experience. And they weren't judgmental with each other. And so going back to, like Fabian and these teachings of like, how do you create a space where somebody can be completely honest with you and you not even make a face, you just kind of embrace it and look at them still with the same compassion and mercy and, actually even empathy, and go, man, I know what you're going through, homie. It sucks. I know you want to be a good dad. I know you want to do the right thing. You create that relationship so that way when you do get to the point of the conversation, when you offer the rehab, that person knows that it's coming from a genuine, authentic place of care. And it's just the trust is huge when it comes to,
right.
to that
so it's
part of
interesting
it.
how you frame it. And I think you're right, because I've watched you all do it. While we do have a rule that you need to go to rehab, it's that you guys don't lead with that as a, hey, here's a Homeboy rule. If you want to be part of Homeboy, you got to do this.
Yeah.
You lead with the relationship and trying to kind of convince them, paint the picture.
And it's also understanding that some of these homeboys have probably not even, homeboys and homegirls, have not even understand what recovery means. So there's some educational formalities that have to come with it as well, where you're inviting and receiving and meeting them where they're at. And it's okay. If you relapse, it happens as long as you're in recovery, and not judging them by it. So it's almost like an invitation, an ongoing invitation, and you're bringing them along gradually and slowly. That's where the trust takes place. And so that's how we began to remove the stigma, because there is a stigma around substance abuse at times, like, just like there is with mental health. So we at Homeboy we brilliantly have removed the stigma just because of our approach and the way we see people as the person rather than the addiction in itself.
Sure. And I think the other brilliant thing about Homeboy is it's a team approach, and we kind of line up people's strengths to help whoever needs that help at the time. And I say it this way because oftentimes when I was on selection committee, when that person was trying to enter our program for the first time, I could have kept talking on and on about how I thought that person needed rehab, but the person's like looking right over my head. And it wasn't until one of you who actually had that lived experience of having gone through that is to sort of make that connection. So Inez, how much does that help you in your dialogues with people about trying to get them to take that step into sobriety?
Well, I also think that the rehab is just the beginning part. Like I say all the time, like we can send you to rehab all day long. It's what you're coming back and doing with the information. Recovery is a lifestyle. It's not just a, let me go to rehab, I'm good for now. We got to learn this new way of life, which means that we have to be able to be willing to take everything that we've known our whole life and do complete opposite. I know for me, when I got into recovery, I knew that anything Inez thought was a good idea, I had to do the complete opposite because I didn't know how to live life. It wasn't just about going and stopping using. I had to learn how to relive my life in a way where I didn't have to go back to the drugs or alcohol to cope with whatever was going on in my life. And so, we can send, somebody to rehab, but what are they coming home to? And so at Homeboys, we try to build a community of recovery where people are like at least on the same path, trying to get to stay clean and sober.
And and I think that's a valid point which you're sharing, because the way I was living wasn't working. So when we do move into recovery, those 12 steps, it's a blueprint of how to live life in life's terms. And when you're in rehab, the goal is that you learn these 12 steps or the approaches that they're offering so that you learn how to live life in life's terms. Because no matter what life will throw at you, what it will, but if you're not in recovery, you're bound to possibly relapse and go back to what you know, which is that coping mechanism that you're so accustomed to. But if you're in recovery and practicing the 12 steps in all your affairs and daily, then you have a most better chance to be to have a long-term recovery. And it is a lifetime process, and that's what we say. We say recovery is a lifetime process. You don't recover, but you learn how to manage, life as it presents itself in recovery.
Definitely agree with you both. And, when you were describing rehab and what rehab really represents, I was going back to Fabian's earlier point of when you look at addiction like a disease, and you look at rehab like a place that is where you can treat the disease. I look at rehab now as not even recovery. Rehab to me is more like diagnosis and treatment, immediate treatment to a disease, an illness. And the one that diagnoses is you. That's the other really liberating thing about this disease is you have to diagnose yourself. You're given the information in rehab and treatment. You're given the literature, and based off the literature, you read it, you spend time with it by yourself, and then you ask yourself, am I, what this book outlines? Like, am I an alcoholic? Am I, do I use substances or alcohol as a coping mechanism for my problems and for my internal suffering? And then you diagnose yourself. And then rehab is a treatment. Rehab treats the disease for 90 days.
Let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make this distinction. I've heard sometimes people, and I'm going to go back to AA more deeply. I've heard people say there's some treatment facilities who prescribe medicines.
Yeah, there are.
And how important is those medicines, the chemicals, to all this versus coming to terms with your wounds?
So it's a very important point that you're bringing up, because even in the book, it outlines that we do seek outside help if needed. So you do seek a doctor's opinion if you have a chemical imbalance. And that's why rehab is vital sometimes to the alcoholic or drug addict, because we're not also physicians. We're just former alcoholics. We're one and the same. We understand each other's experiences, but ultimately it's not a cookie cutter program neither. And if you are using substances to treat this disease, like the disease that outlines in the book, but you also have a chemical imbalance, or you also do diagnosed, this is the importance of like treatment centers and rehabilitation centers, because then you can get the help that you really need. One part of your help can be recovery. It could be the program of AA, it could be the 12 steps, but there also might be like added support that's needed. And that's why there are clinicians, there are, counselors that will sit with you. There are therapists there are psychologists that could potentially diagnose you for, the things that you need. So really, really great point that you bring up, but it's also outlined in the book of AA, of Alcoholics Anonymous as well.
So Inez, what would you say though about Jose's answer about the medicines? How important is you go to AA, you go to a rehab and they prescribe drugs to help you stabilize? Now, before you answer, I just want to tell you, obviously, we're not experts. None of us are doctors. None of us are lawyers. None of us are psychiatrists. But you guys have a lot of wisdom. I've seen you help a lot of people. So you have sort of good knowledge.
Well, I think it's always amazing to me that a person will tell me, Inez, I don't want to take the medication that doctor's prescribing to me. I'd rather smoke weed, right? And it's like, you might need that medication for right now. In the beginning, when we're getting clean and sober, all kinds of stuff is happening, right? So we need that. Sometimes some people need that extra help for the medication to get stabilized. And then, with time and practice and stuff like that, they might stop using the medications because they no longer need it. But we're doing so much damage to our bodies that I do believe, some of us might need some medication in the beginning or even in the middle. Like, it's all depends on the person and what they're going through, what their body needs to get stabilized to be to their normal,
Sure. And I think we come to learn that this is a disease of the mind, the body, and the spirit.
That's right.
And I think when we're in rehab, it gives us the opportunity to reflect, step out of our daily lifestyle, and then we can begin to analyze the mind, the body, and then begin to feed the spirit. And if it is said that the mind needs extra help and support, then you might just need that medicine to help you stabilize that. But it is as a disease of the mind, the body, and spirit. And so that is the beauty of recovery and rehabs and 12-step, that it feeds all those and it helps to connect those three. So
it interests me a lot about what I've learned from you all in terms of recovery and AA is the spirit part of this. And so, as you just said, it's important to say heal the spirit. But someone who doesn't think that way, how do they kind of come around to those terms?
The first thing is you're constantly, for me personally, I speak on my behalf of me, I was constantly blaming myself and everyone else for my mistakes. There was no such thing as believing in something greater than myself. There was no God in my life. There's no such thing, because I would even blame God for what I was experiencing since a little one. Because if there was a God, then why is my father not in my life? And why is he a heroin addict constantly, in DV with my mother? So where's God in all this? So, it begins like that. So you start to blame everyone. But I think but eventually you also, what Jose said earlier, you're living in guilt and shame and the constant pain that you're causing those loved ones, and let alone yourself. And so in that, you start to not want to be around, like you don't want to be here, but it takes a power greater than yourself. You have to turn your life over. And I think it wasn't until I surrendered that I was able then to believe that there was something greater than myself. And they say this in recovery, that restores you back to sanity. But it is only when you surrender and give yourself to the higher being that it's going to allow you to really be kind to self, to take the steps that are in front of you. And that's when you surrender and then trust, like Inez or Jose or someone who has been in recovery to walk alongside with you. And as you start to accomplish and you start to mend some of those guilts and shames and some of those elements, then you start to see spirituality bloom. And then you start to grow in that.
Let me ask you guys this question. And it's going to sound almost silly how I asked the question. I believe what you say. It makes so much sense. It's about, there's a spiritual component to this. But yet there are people who've believed in God their whole life who are spiritual, who sort of are addicted to alcohol and drugs. So, Jose, how do you kind of like piece those two things together?
This might sound crazy, but I believe suffering leads to salvation. You have to go through enough suffering before you can surrender and say, God, help me. Before you can even have like the little small faith of a mustard seed to believe that there's a possibility that there's something outside of me that can save me. Because to Fabian's point earlier of even if there is a God, I'm going to blame God for everything tragic that happened in my life. Even if, let's just say I do believe in a God, or I went to church all my life, but did I really believe, did I fully believe? It was only until, and I've seen this with my own life, but I've seen this in others' lives, is that it was only until there was enough suffering for you to finally surrender to the idea that God was real and that God could save you. Because even in the 12 steps, it says God could and would if he were sought. And so, the first step is admitted that I was powerless over alcohol. My life had become unmanageable. That's suffering at its finest. Mm-hmm. I had to get to the point where no matter what anybody told me, no matter all the books I read, philosophize it, even what church would say, that I had to get to the point where my life was so unmanageable that I hit my knees. That it got to that point where now I'm praying, going, please, if you're real, save me. Because you lose all control, as someone that's addicted to a substance, you lose all control. You're living in shame and guilt. And then you get to a point where you go like, well, like Fabian was saying earlier, this is recreational. So I can stop when I want to stop, but then you can't. You get to that point where you cannot stop no matter what. You consciously tell yourself, this is it. This is my last drink. This is my last use. And then the next day comes and you cannot stop. To save your life, you can't stop. Your children can be banging you. Your wife can be leaving you. Your job has just fired you. And you know that if you keep doing this, you're going to die. And yet you still go on suffering. And then you get to the point where you suffer so much that you're willing to cry out to this God that either one didn't exist, or you've known all your life, but it's never really been real, like a real tangible thing. And then when you experience God, and I believe it's in this, is you start to believe, God save me. Please, if you're real. It's prayers like that. If you exist, rescue me. Then you're introduced to a community that doesn't judge you, that welcomes you with open arms, that loves you till you can love yourself. These experiences begin to reshape me, not just my body, not just my mind, but my spirit. It began to fill my spirit going, wait a second. I prayed the prayer, introduced to this community. If God was real, this is what God would look like. Compassionate, loving, merciful, celebratory, just clapping for you. I got 1 day sober. Congratulations. Go for it. We're rooting for you. We love you. I slipped and fell and relapsed. It's okay. Come here. Let us love on you. Then you experience this God that you never believed in. It's a trip.
Yeah.
And I just want to, I know maybe I'm moving forward too fast, but as you get clean and you get all these experiences, then there is a power greater than myself. There is a higher power, because even when you're clean, sober, no matter how many years, life is still hard.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't lean on your higher power or your higher being or your God of some sort, you may not make the 10 years, the 15 years, the 20 years. So something like that had to happen, what you just explained, in order for us to believe long enough to stay grounded in our recovery, so that we can build upon the years.
That's right.
So Inez, picking up on these two thoughts of just getting to the tough suffering and then surrendering to a higher power. First of all, would you agree?
I do. I would agree.
And then what's enabled you to stay sober for all these years?
I haven't found a good enough reason to go back to use yet. Like, life still shows up. I continue. I do believe that there's power in the 12 steps, doing the steps in the order that they are in. In the beginning, it's about me, right? Then it's about you. And then eventually you get to this place where this spiritual awakening happens, where it becomes about God, giving back, helping another person, And that's in the beginning of getting clean and sober, right? Because after a few years clean and sober, everything else starts showing up. In the beginning, it's about the drug use and it's about the lifestyle I had. But now it's more of like the life I live today. How do I surrender on a daily basis to God and say, you take over from here. I can't do it because I have control issues. And I know that about me because I learned that through doing the steps. I was able to learn about my patterns and what makes Inez tick. So when I start seeing them in my daily life, I know, okay, hold on. Let me check myself, because it's not now today. My life is not just about my drug history. It's about how my behaviors are today, and how am I checking myself on a daily basis? How am I making sure that when I lay my head at night, I do my list of who did I wrong today, and who do I owe an apology, and did I do this right, and how do I fix that right away? So I know through the 12 steps, I've learned my patterns, and I've learned and come to a point to where I know how to check myself on
So
them.
is it about forgiving yourself or is it about forgiving others?
Both. I believe it's both.
Mm-hmm.
I got coming to a place to where I've taken responsibility for my own actions, and I no longer blame others for theirs. I've learned to put people where they belong in their place. So this is how it worked and this is how it is. And I've accepted that. I've come to accept my parents for their addiction and their wrongs in my eyes. I'm learning how to accept and other things in my life. So I know that on a daily basis, there's certain things that I have to do on a daily basis in order to keep my sobriety.
And they also say, when you're first in recovery, there's a selfish program. Sometimes you got to love your loved ones from a distance. And that's when we begin to make the amends. And if you don't have a spiritual component or concept or a relationship with your higher power, when making amends to a loved one or someone you really care for and they're not willing to accept that amend, that could be re-triggering. And then that, you could either go back or you lean on your higher power. And sometimes you just got to love them from a distance,
right,
as hard as it can be. And that's recovery, and that's what it takes.
Yeah, I think what I so respect what Homeboy does and think what's so important is as we know someone who's in recovery, but as I say to outside people, like we're helping somebody not just when they show up at Homeboy from 9 to 5, we're helping them 24 hours a day. And so I've heard you say to people, just don't go out with that guy. Don't go out with that woman because they're no good for you, because they're not in recovery and they're going to bring you down. And so I appreciate you all have the courage to speak those truths in an important way to people.
People, places, and things. We always say people, places, and things. I tell the homies, if you kick it in a barbershop long enough, you're going to get a haircut.
Mm-hmm.
I'll find a way to get a haircut. I don't even have no hair.
Right.
So it's just, you're right. People, places, and things. And just, I mean, there's so much that you guys both said, you know, just golden recovery. And you made me think about like the early days. And there's so many different phases to this, you know, your early days in recovery, and the fellowship becomes like a big part of it. And you're higher, like kind of, they're like your higher power in a sense, because they're the ones keeping you sober, keeping you clean, sober dances, you know, meetings every day. But then you have to, I just believe that it does become at a certain point this spiritual journey. The 12 steps morph into this road, spiritual, narrow, sometimes lonely, solitude, meditation and prayer. The 11th step is used, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. It's like it becomes you and God. And then, you know, what's so fascinating is like you get to a point too where it's like, does anybody really need to be forgiven? Do I even need to be forgiven? Or is yesterday gone? And just for the day, this is all I have. I got the next 24 hours. I get to do with it whatever I choose. Do I got to go back into yesterday? Do I have to trip so much about the future? Or am I just here right now experiencing what's happening right in front of me? And that's the hope, I think, you know, for all of us, that we do eventually, these 12 steps morph into like finding God in the arts, you know, finding God in all the connections that you make, finding God in your children, finding God in your colleagues at work, just seeing God in everything that we do. It's just a real fascinating thing that if you stick around long enough, it does, I believe, morph into this. You're on this spiritual plane they talk about.
Sure.
You know.
And the beautiful thing of the 12 steps, I call it a blueprint, because, you know, let's just say, you know, like, and I'll just share it. Like this month, August 1st, I've turned 20 years clean and sober.
Oh, wow.
So I'm celebrating that this month. What has helped me is the 12 steps, because they serve as a blueprint. And no matter how many years you have under your belt, you know, we all make mistakes. We can fall short, character defects. But then you say, okay, let me go back down to step 4, where I have to do a thorough inventory of what's being triggered again. And then, okay, and then, oh my God, this person is triggering me, has this personality. Let me go back to step 1, because I'm powerless in this moment.
Yeah.
And so you bounce through the steps to keep you going and staying in connection with your higher being. And that's the beauty of those 12 steps. And that's what has held me to make these 20 years, because I keep utilizing them in my daily life.
Well, certainly congratulations on the 20 years.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you're willing to share, like, how many times did you go through rehab or AA before it stuck?
Man, how many times? How many times you send me to
Send them about 3 to 4 times, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
3
yeah,
to 4.
about 3 to
Inez?
4.
Probably, yeah. I went to rehab twice. And then, a couple times.
Sure. Same thing, Jose?
Yeah, I would say 4, maybe 4 times.
So I bring that up because if anybody's listening to this and they have a loved one who's going through addiction, I guess you got to be patient, right? That it doesn't work right away.
We like to say in recovery, it takes what it takes. Mm-hmm. And also just going back to like the real, when you look at recovery, when you look at AA, I'm not talking about treatment, I'm not talking about rehab. I'm talking about like recovery, and you look at AA, one addict, one alcoholic helping another. I see it all the time. You got people that got 16 years, go out. Mm-hmm. You don't shame and guilt them. We welcome you right back with open arms. You look at the person that's struggling, that's been trying, attempting to get sober or clean, and they fall. You know, the best solution to that is love and just compassion. You know, because they're trying. You know, if I see someone trying, this morning we were talking about a case. As long as the homie wants to try, like, we're gonna roll the red carpet out for him. It's only until you choose not to, you know, that we can't do anything for you, because we can't do it for you. There's no way, no one, no how that can do recovery for you. It's a you thing. It's a selfish program. It's a you thing. But we can offer the resources and as many times as it takes.
Mm-hmm.
It takes 100
So, Inez,
times.
what's harm reduction mean?
Oh, I
You
was
hear
just,
that term a lot.
I was just talking about that a little while ago. Like, what does it really mean? By book definition, I don't know what that really means, but I know it's.
How do we practice it?
How do we practice harm reduction?
The thing about harm reduction is it has different perspectives according to who's using it. So there's a harm reduction definition under mental health, and then there's substance abuse harm reduction, if you would call it that. But I think there's many variables in harm reduction, and we miss the mark sometimes, and harm reduction to me is not as obvious as, okay, well, he went from meth to alcohol. Okay, that's harm reduction, but really we're looking at the process of harm reduction. What are the steps, the processes that he has put in play that signify that there is some harm being reduced accordingly?
And do we think that's good? That's a good sign that he went from meth to alcohol?
It's a good step, but what we're trying to identify when I think of harm reduction, it's about the process and the shifts in behavior or choices that he made to go from meth to alcohol. That's where harm reduction lives, not the symbolic gesture, but the steps. Because in that, if he can go from meth to alcohol, what process did he use, or what was the shift within him that caused him to make that choice? That's where it's at. That's harm reduction to me, looking at those choices and shifts that he has made to reduce the harm, that's going to lead him to death.
And I would
then
say,
it's also, I also feel that it's just, because there's a thin line between the harm reduction and just switching your addiction, going from, heroin to alcohol. It's like Fabian's saying, like, what's the in between? What else are you putting into place for it? Like, what are you also doing or practicing that's helping you with that? Because eventually the goal is to be able to live a life without any substances, And so if you're going from one drug to another, you're just replacing your addiction with the same behaviors. And so is that really helping somebody out, or is it just masking the addiction,
I agree, because there's this chapter in the book. I love it. It's one of my favorite chapters, and it's Bill W., and he's talking about when he first tried to get sober, and he's like, I went from drinking on the weekends only to drinking only during the week, to drinking, only on celebrations, to drinking only on birthdays, to never drinking on birthdays, to, he tried all these different ways, but the addiction was still being fueled the whole way through. So when it comes to harm reduction, it depends on who's in the room and who's talking about it. This is just a personal thing. I believe that the only way to recovery is abstinence. That's the way it's outlined in the book. I think that now when it comes to treatment, when it comes to treating this disease early on, like I said before, I believe in, having a clinician in the room. If there's medication that needs to be prescribed, if there's a clear pathway for harm reduction to occur in a person's life. But when I'm talking about recovery, true recovery, spiritual connection, that abstinence is the only way. Because you can you could switch from weed to meth, from meth to alcohol, from alcohol back to weed. And we can consider that harm reduction, depending on who's looking at it. The other thing I want to mention is something that I don't know if we've dialogued on enough, but this big pharma, we talk about mass incarceration, but there's also now when you look at like big pharma and trying to prescribe our way out of all these problems. On the one hand, I say, yes, definitely medicate people if they need the medication. But I'm watching right now, I'm at the desk, and I'm watching homies paroled from prison being diagnosed and being prescribed Suboxone. 19 years old, never had a heroin addiction, being prescribed Suboxone. They're coming home, and two things occur when you do that to somebody. I can't even send them to a sober living home because they're dirty, their tests come out dirty. So we have to get creative and go, okay, well, where do we house this person? So 9 times out of 10, most of them end up homeless, on Suboxone, which eventually leads to a heroin addiction. When I would say as a clinician or a drug counselor or whoever's treating these people could maybe look at their service plan a little bit differently and figure out a different way, not to just prescribe every single person that sits at your desk Suboxone, because that can also be addictive. And I know we've dealt with some of that stuff internally. We've had these dialogues, but it's just interesting to look at.
Yeah, the other interesting point, if I get this right, that what I've learned from you guys is in prison, there's a lot of medication prescribed.
Absolutely.
Then all of a sudden they get released and they're handed a whole list of prescriptions, that doesn't mean they're going to live a healthy life
That's
outside.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's hard to, it's hard to fill all these prescriptions, but it's also harder to house them because they have all these prescriptions and all these drugs in their system. So
And
the other thing I wanted to say in that story, because I had the pleasure of watching you all, you guys would argue over what's the best way to help somebody.
absolutely.
It's almost, I'm saying that because it's clear there's no one way. It's just trying to figure out the best path for any individual person.
That's right.
So you believe in abstinence, someone else may believe harm reduction is the right path.
Yeah. And we'll have these dialogues, and that's what I love about the Homeboy Way is because it's not just my way, not just Inez's way. You know, in counsel, you know, it might be us three talking about recovery or treatment, but then you might have, you know, Father Greg or Stevie, they'll have their own perspective. And what we try to do is at the end of the day is get to the best possible solution for the individual that we're talking about, whether it be harm reduction or straight abstinence.
Yeah. I think I learned that with an individual at Homeboy where we tried everything in the book. Grew up with heroin addict parents, and I used to watch my mom on methadone. And being on methadone and Suboxone and all those MAT services, all MAT medications, those are just as hard to get off of than as the drug itself, even harder. And I learned with one individual where I was so like dead set on, no, we're not going to do methadone. We're not going to do this with him. And at some point it was like, let's try it. You know, if this is going to help him, let's give it a try. Let's see how it works. Let's see how it plays out. You know what I mean? So I've learned like not everything is just one way. Like we have to get creative in how to give people recovery. Do I believe MAT services work? I think they can work, accompanied with recovery, accompanied with something else that goes with it. It can't just be, I'm going to be on methadone for the next 13 years and have nothing with it, you know? Today, as a matter of fact, there was a trainee, she came in, she was so tears in her eyes sharing that she got off of Suboxone and how her life is so much better. And she thanked us for pushing the issue about getting off of it. And it just reminded me like, this is why we do the work that we do. And it is possible for somebody to.
And I just want to be clear, I've learned from you all that also there's some people out there that say you don't have to get off it, right?
Yeah.
That you can still live your life on Suboxone. The other thing I want to highlight is we're fortunate to be at Homeboy. We have a beautiful community. And that is a key part of all this, is having a community to go to that supports you and loves you no matter what and doesn't shame you. That's a part of the recovery.
It's a huge part of it, but you want to jump in?
Cool. Yeah.
So what would you say, how do you then advise somebody if someone's listening to this, they have a loved one who's abusing substances, maybe they go to AA or NA, but they have no community to turn to. What do you say? How do you give them advice?
For the person that I had to actually go through this, it's a trip that I did. There's a group out there, a fellowship out there called Al-Anon. And it's really helpful when trying to support somebody in your life that, you know, is addicted to a substance or struggling with alcoholism. But sometimes you got to find a community, you know, and that could be through actually a physical community, a meeting. That could be through a book. That could be through a podcast. You got to find a community that you can connect to some of these ideas and theories and experiences. Because for me, that really helped me look at one of my loved ones that was going through addiction. Even though I had been through it myself, it's even harder when you have someone that's actually going through it and you got to support them through it. And then you got to stand on all these things that we just talked about, you know, the compassion, the love, the mercy. And so it's helpful too for you to first find a community that works for you and then do your best to introduce that person that you love that's struggling to a community that can work for them.
Sure. I want to ask about marijuana, and I'm not sure I'm going to get the same answer from all three of you. So, Inez,
Yes.
what's your view of marijuana, and is it a gateway drug, do you think?
Do I believe? Yes, I do believe that. I do believe it's a gateway drug. I think it's the beginning of you're self-medicating again. You know what I mean? I had a 24-year-old the other day come in trying to explain to me he has back problems and he can't sleep. And I'm like, bro, go to the doctor then, you know? Go see the doctor and see, no, they're going to give me ibuprofen. I can't take that. I'm going to smoke weed. That's the problem. You know, we want to self-medicate. We want to feel that high. And then eventually that, for some people, it doesn't for everybody, but eventually it leads to something else. Because along with that, you're drinking, you're leaning, you're doing something with it. So I do believe it's a gateway. And I do believe that it's out of control in our community right now. It's like everybody is smoking weed. Nobody, Father Greg says, if you're not feeling, you're not healing, right? And so that's a big part of what we do is we want you to get to a healing part. But if you're smoked out all day long, how are you going to get there?
Yeah, Fabian?
I agree with Inez. I also believe that it could progress. We began to build tolerance. That's how I began. Smoke a little weed, drink a little 40. By the time you know it, you build so much tolerance around the marijuana that it starts to become boring. And then someone comes in and introduces you to something else, and it makes it that much easier to try that something else because the marijuana's, you built this tolerance. And I also, and it's tough. I work with young adults and, and I see them and they're not, when I do see them high, they're not present. They're not here. Almost like they're in La La Land. I always say it must be nice in La La Land because they're just like, constantly. And then the real question is, what are you avoiding? What are you running from? Why is it that you continuously have to be high? What is it? And that's where we're trying to get to, like, understand why is it that they're constantly getting high? Where are they running from? What they're avoiding? And so I think it does progress. And I've seen it like 9 times out of 10 from people that I do know throughout my years at Homeboy. I've seen folks go from here to here to here to even we lose them sometimes. And so, I would say it's a gateway drug, and I don't condone it in a sense.
Jose?
I would disagree and say it's not a gateway drug. I would say it's a hard drug. I would say I would say marijuana is just as hard as methamphetamine right now. You, depending on what type of marijuana you're consuming, I would consider some of it just as if you were using methamphetamine. The psychosis that comes with it, how it enhances. If you have some type of mental disease or illness, it would enhance it. You go into straight psychosis. I'm watching people, scratch their skin off. And it's just, back, I think when we were growing up, it was a gateway drug. You smoke a little weed, sip a little drink. Now I feel like I'm concerned with our community and people that are consuming these products because I don't know what's in it. But I know that it's doing something. It's affecting our community in such a negative way. Like, to Fabian's point, people are not present when they're on it. It's strong. It's stronger, I think, than it's ever been. It's chemically enhanced. I think that we're going to see the effects of what's happening right now 10 years from now. And as a society, we're going to have to revisit how we consider marijuana because it's really, really strong and it's impacting our community, I would say, in a negative way. The other thing is these weed shops that are popping up all over the place in our communities. And when you look at, the law was changed on this and people that were convicted of crimes that had to do with marijuana were supposed to be given these licenses, which I think like 1 in 100 were given a license. So the community thought, there's equity here. It's actually people that have capital that are coming in.
Big businesses
that are owning all these marijuana shops, and they're planting them right in the heart of all of our communities, South LA, East LA. And, I would say that it's alarming. And as a society, we got to revisit how we're typing this substance, to be honest.
And you're absolutely right. When you think about it, this is where the medical aspect comes, the clinical aspect, because, some people are addicted to uppers and some like depressants, and marijuana is a depressant. And maybe that's where they like to live, in that depressant. I'm an upper. I like to be up. That's just me. That's the chemical imbalance that I have. Like, that's my chemistry. And so, but also when you really put it in perspective and listening at times to these young men and women, as well as just folks that I know, it creates the same problems. You have folk, depending on the geographical area and your status, to be honest with you, like some of us don't have the means to be able to sustain this addiction of marijuana. And I find out that, by Monday, they ain't got no more money. And that's because they're spending $80 for a vial of some sort. And then they're just spending, and so it creates the same issues of irresponsibility, being powerless, the same things that we're talking about, the 12 steps. So it's the same as meth, and you're just addicted to marijuana.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I were on meth, because you're constantly doing it. And, it's just,
you can't be without it.
It's just perceived differently because it's weed. It's less than this.
And it's legal.
And it's
legal. Well, listen, I want to thank you all for this episode. And I just want to say, sincerely, I've so admired your journeys and the wisdom and guidance you've given people. And back to, as I sat in counsel all those years and watched, you all wouldn't give up on people. I think folks who haven't been through that journey will willing to give up more on a person who's addicted right now and abusing substance. But you all have this tenacity that you don't want to, give up on people, because I think you see how your life is now and you see yourself. You saw yourself in what that person was doing at that moment. And it's what makes Homeboy special, is your caring and your love for people.
And I think it also stems from the people that never gave up on us. There was folks out there who stood by us regardless of the choices, what we were causing. There was always that one person or that multiple that didn't give up on us. And thank God they didn't, because when I needed the most, they were still there and ready to receive. And that's Homeboy.
That's right.
And so we need to practice that as we, in our recovery, we continue to practice that. Because what if it is that time? Mm-hmm. What if it is today? And if we give up, we miss the opportunity, right? So that's why we keep extending our hands out.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all.